Greetings. Welcome to Divine Comedy, a free-flowing conversation about comedy, spirituality, and life. Your hosts are Reverend Dr. Todd and Gil Flores. So sit back and relax, and together, let's explore this beautiful and sacred practice of humor.
That's a cool set.
Yeah, check it out. How you doing, man?
Great. How are you guys?
I'm good. I'm just my reminder.
This is like talk show sets shit right there. Pretty cool.
Letterman used to be here.
I thought I recognized it. Yeah. The mini bottles of water is what I saw. I said, you know what? Fucking Letterman those same bottles on his set.
How are you doing, man?
What's in the mug? That's the bigger question.
Oh, just coffee right now for me. What's in your mug?
You know what? It is unusually hot up here right now. It is. I don't even know what the temperature is, but we've got all the windows open and there's no air conditioning in the parsonage. So Casamigos tequila is managing to help
cool you down. Huh?
Yes, I'm already like
repo
is licking my face. It's awful. So tell me what this is. Tell me what we're doing.
So this is our second one of these. We're gonna put one out every month, and the first one comes out on Thursday.
Cool.
And basically, we're just gonna talk about comedy, and its theological repercussions and its spiritual repercussions, and really just talk about stuff that's funny and stuff that we find funny and why we find it funny.
Okay.
Because we think comedy is a spiritual exercise, and you have the experience to we want to hear some stories.
Well, you know, it's funny. I don't know who's listening, but I'm thinking of people like Steve Davis and Barry Kuzer and John Mann. These guys are going, Jesus, you're going to ask them to tell stories about comedy. Oh my God, how long is the show? Because some of my friends have heard them all. So if any of you guys are tuning in, you can just mute this and go get a snack, because you probably heard these stories before. So, and who's sitting next to you? Who's the co-host? I think we may have met at once at some point, but I don't know.
My name is Gil Flores. I don't know if we've met. I know about you.
Watch Cops.
All good things. All good things.
All right. Very good. Nice to meet you.
So what kind of Casamigos? Añejo? Reposado?
You know, it's funny. I'll tell you something that's really cool. Literally down in Denver, you can get it for like $28.99, low 30s somewhere. Up here, it's almost $50 for the silver. And so in order for me to buy, I literally have to go down there, buy it. If I run out, I don't restock up here because it's literally $20 more in Aspen than it is down there. But I do have a bottle of the Añejo and the Reposado down below. But this I've got all my bases covered for future. When you guys come up to visit, I'll break that out. That sounds like a plan. That would be good. So
you know the comedian Ron White has a tequila, and it's pretty good.
Tequila?
Yeah, it's real. See, I'm from Guadalajara, which is close to the city of tequila.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit of a tequila snob, and I was ready to hate it, and it's really good. It's really good.
I will tell you, up in Aspen, it is a serious tequila and mezcal stronghold up here. Right. Like the way bourbon is down in Denver. There are places that carry like the full run of Don Miguel mezcals, and in fact the Casamigos among the snobs is not the favorite. I mean, I like it because the man made $1 billion off selling it, so you got to give him some credit for that.
But it's pretty good.
Like the Santo Leguas, and that one is a solid go-to that I pick up. And there's another one that I'm blanking on right now.
Can I recommend one that's not expensive? It's called Centenario.
Oh, I know the bottle. Yeah, it's kind of like almost like a cathedral window, right?
Yeah,
and it's got ribbing on it. Yeah. That was the other one I was trying to think of, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
The Añejo is like $30. You know, probably in Denver even cheaper, and it's a good go-to inexpensive tequila that's really sippable. You could just sip it with a cigar or something. It's great.
Dig it. That's great. For you folks tuning in at home, we were supposed to talk about comedy, but then we also got on booze. God knows you can't shut me up when we start talking about booze too. So
we'll have to do a tequila podcast one of these days.
Hey, you know what? Count me in. I would even as just the tester dude. Like, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but I'll be. Hey, I got to do a shout out right now, Todd. I in front of God and Facebook and everyone. How much weight have you lost, man?
Oh, about 75 pounds.
Dude, you're killing it. You look fantastic. You look really good.
I appreciate that, brother.
Is that the crack? What's caused the weight loss?
It's mostly crack. Yeah, mostly. I give that the most credit, but then I eat right and exercise too, and
okay. Well, that's good.
Everyone doesn't know or didn't know about the crack addiction until you just told them. I had to cover it with diet and exercise.
There you go. Yeah. Black tar heroin wasn't doing it for you. You decided to go full on.
Exactly. We had to take it next level.
So, what can I tell you about comedy? I used to be very funny. Yeah.
Well, we're recording this and it's on Facebook Live. So the people that are watching right now get the whole experience, and then we'll put this out a little at a later date, the recorded part. And so I'll just kind of kick it off here, and then we'll ask you some questions. You tell us some stories.
Cool.
And I think it's going to be really fun.
Love it.
Welcome everyone to our second episode of the Divine Comedy Podcast, and this is Gil, and we have a special guest with us. And if you want to introduce yourself, Jerry.
Sure. My name is Jerry Herships. I am the pastor up at Aspen Community Church, but it is a second career for me. I did stand-up for 26 years. Started in the Midwest, and then out in Los Angeles, and then all over the country. And left that, and now dedicating myself to the Lord. Scott, that's basically that's the work I do. That's what it is, and it pays about the same. That's how far I got in comedy. So.
Jerry's one of the funniest guys I know. I'm really thank you for coming on here, Jerry, and talking with us.
I love it, Todd. I anytime I get a chance to talk to you, I jump at it because we seem to hit it off pretty well together. So that part's great. So.
Absolutely, we're gonna have a good time. Gil, did you have any thoughts or anything you want to start out? Gil knows a lot about the history of comedy. I'm kind of in the way here because Gil has a lot of good questions, and he knows a lot about the history of comedy that I'm always very interested in. And cool. the last time after the last episode, I was texting with Jerry because some stuff came up, and Gil was asking questions. I was asking Jerry, and Jerry was like, started having all these stories, and we're like, we should just have him on and let him tell the stories and cut out the middleman here.
No, that's great. That's great. I dig anybody that's a student of the craft. It is it's too often not thought that way, and I think I think that's a shame. I think it suffers from the people that we really love that look really good. Just make it look easy. And I don't know if you saw which Chappelle special it was, but at the end of it, it was when he was doing the Broadway show. And at the end of it, he pulled out a stool and said, "Hey, I'm just going to answer any questions you guys want to ask." And this guy stood up, and he was a young kid, man. He was probably 18. And he goes, "So do you have any advice for like people that want to start in comedy?" And Chappelle goes, "Are you thinking about doing that?" And he goes, "Well, I wasn't until tonight, but now I thought, maybe I'd give it a try." And everybody cracked up. Chappelle goes, "I don't know to take that as a compliment or an insult." I just sort of walk in people and go, "Oh, it looks like brain surgery. Hell, how hard can it be?" But Chappelle makes it about as easy as, but he's been doing it since he's 14. And he's 44 now. So, I mean, you do something for 30 years, you start to get the groove. You start to get the hang of it. So, who are your heroes of the past?
Well, George Carlin, Richard Pryor.
Wow.
And before those guys, because those are guys that's when it became called stand-up. But then before the stand-ups, there was, George Burns, Dean Martin, those guys who were just a guy who I think is funny, and people know he's funny, but I think he's even funnier than people realize is Jerry Lewis.
Is who?
Jerry Lewis.
Oh my God, yes.
Like he had like little things that would happen in his movies, like little things that like that one part where he's like he's at the receptionist's desk and he's trying to grab all the phones to stop them from ringing. Like, just why is that funny? How did he think of that? You know, like just like little things like that, right?
And you know, you see remnants of that when you watch something like Frasier, and you watch David Hyde Pierce try to iron a pair of pants and they catch on fire.
Yes.
And you're, you know, I don't think people realize, like, my God, how long did it take him to block that and to like get it just right? And he's just a master of doing that stuff. And why am I forgetting? Deborah Messer from Will and Grace. She was great at that shit. Like they just killed it when it came to like physical comedy stuff. Yeah. And you're right. And it's funny you mentioned like Carlin and Pryor and those guys. You know, George Carlin, when he used to do Vegas, you can see old clips of him. You can find Carlin. I think you could Google like Carlin in a tie, and you'll find clips of him in a suit with a dress shirt and a straight tie and everything. And there came a moment when he was like, fuck, this is not me. Like, this is not who I am. And, you know, he became sort of the guy of his generation. And, you know, as funny as Pryor was, early on, Pryor was riffing off Red Fox. I mean, Red Fox was the guy that, you know, like everybody had somebody prior to, you know, I mean, you look at Pryor, and then Pryor, when it came to, you know, like Eddie Murphy, and then Chris Rock. And I think Chappelle's a prophet. I mean, you talked about divine comedy. I think comedians are the last truth tellers.
100%.
I mean, I don't have to think they have to worry about people putting money in the plate. They don't have to worry about nobody showing up next week. And they lay some hard truths out there.
Chappelle, yeah.
What's that? Say again?
I said, especially Chappelle, because he's not beholden to anybody anymore. No. So he can say whatever he wants. Yeah.
He didn't give a shit. No, he simply just doesn't care. And you know, I mean, he will stand out in ways that almost nobody else will. Yeah, you get some good heroes, man. Those are great people.
Yeah, but so what years did you start coming up in comedy?
Yeah, so I landed a gig. I was doing just local stuff in Detroit, and even in high school back in the early '80s, and landed a job at an amusement park called Cedar Point. Shout out to, man, there's a lot of friends that I have that we know each other through Cedar Point. And there was an IMAX theater. I had no idea what the show was. I just got hired to MC. And they said, you'll do a 15-minute show 6 times a day, 5 days a week. And on the 6th day, the other MC has the time off. So you'll do all the show, which is 12 shows. So I did whatever that is, 42 shows a week, and got to the park. And the show manager said, yeah, go down and check out the theater. So I was expecting like a theater like you see in amusement parks, like a Lusty Lil's or a Red Garter Saloon, you know, like one of those. And in fact, they had a number of those at Cedar Point. And I get down there, and it was an IMAX movie theater. And it was a building they built attached to the movie theater. And so I get in, and it's a 1,000-seat theater. And I'm like, shitting myself. I'm like, I've never done like more than like 30 people at a Gong talent show before. And they didn't really care. They're like, well, you got the gig, so figure it out. So you got to write up your own thing. And I did a 15-minute just one-man show just on the park, on things that people could see. Made a sort of a PR piece. But I'll tell you what, I took home $210 every week. So I was rolling in the cat. But you know what? I met my wife there. I mean, it was the greatest. Steve Davis, who I moved out to LA with, I met him there. I mean, it was a life-changing experience. I was there in 85, finished up school in 86, 87. They asked me to come back, and I came back because I thought, you know what? I'm getting ready to move to LA. Wouldn't be bad to, you know, have your chops. And my brother was a comic. And I remember, I don't know if I was cocky, but I was pretty confident. You know, I had done, in those 2 summers, I probably performed in front of over 1 million people because, you know, that many, we're doing 42,000 people a week. And so, I mean, there was a lot. And my brother sat me down and he said, look, he says, I think you speak well in front of people, and I think you're funny. he says, but you're going to LA. And he said, you will be competing against guys that have an hour of solid shit and you've got 15 minutes. So he goes, I just want to prep you for you're leaving the pond, baby. You are going out to, and it's really true. The first week we were there, when me and Steve moved there, I said, we got to go to the Improv, because the Improv was like Mecca. That was Robin Williams and Billy Crystal and Seinfeld and Paul Reiser and Adam Sandler, David Spade, everybody, Leno, all those people came up. And we got there and we went to the club. There's a club in front of the Improv. The bar out front's called Hell's Kitchen. And we went there and we were standing at the bar, and it was, I don't know, like a Monday or Tuesday night. And Steve and I are like, it's dead in here. And I remember we were drinking, I was drinking a Corona. We had so little money. I'd drink like a beer. Like everybody's like, man, LA must have been raging. I said, I knew money for it to be raging. Like we'd have one beer and drink it all night till it got warm, and then we'd leave. So we were both sitting there and we said, why is it so dead? And the bartender goes, oh, Robin Williams stopped in to do a set. He's in back in the showroom. And we're like, Robin Williams on stage right now? They're like, yeah. We're like, oh my God. He goes, yeah, it's just, I don't know, I think it's like $25 and 2-drink cover. And we were like, we just didn't have it. So we were close enough that if this isn't torture for people that love comedy, we were close enough to hear 300 people cracking up, but we couldn't hear the jokes. You know what I mean? We couldn't hear Robin talk. And that was as close as we ever got to seeing Robin Williams. I to this day, I wish I had a credit card or was smart enough to use. I think I had like a gas card. I don't know if the bartender would have taken that for a 76 station, but something, because it would have been extraordinary to be that close and see Robin would have been just mind blowing. That just would have been amazing. But we got out there in 87. I stayed out for almost 10 years. Steve is still out there. Steve's worked in entertainment out there for 30 plus years and has done fantastic. Been a VP at Warner Brothers, does promo work. He's the real deal. He really knows the town now. But I was out there, and then we left after the Northridge quake. And after when the riots happened out there in, 93, 94, we moved to Florida. And at that point, I was doing comedy enough that I just needed an airport where I could travel. And, Disney Orlando has a great airport. So that made it easier for me. That made it easy.
So who were the comics that were working at the Improv that were like, they were not known names, but maybe guys that were coming up and were working?
Right, yeah. No, there were a lot of guys that were, so in 1989, that was the year that Seinfeld started. It was called the Seinfeld Chronicle, I think, at that time. So Jerry was huge as a comedian, but not that breakthrough sitcom star where even your grandmother knows who it is. You know what I mean? Like, so he was coming up. Leno was doing Monday nights for Carson, and he was coming up. Adam Sandler, David Spade were there. They were doing comedy and they were killing it, but they weren't even on Saturday Night Live yet. In fact, I think they auditioned for Lorne Michaels and they didn't make the show, but I know Adam got offered like a writing gig, and he started writing. And I think when he wrote Opera Man, I think Opera Man was what put him in front of the camera. And then,
that's cool.
Drew Carey was there. Dennis Miller came when he was in town. Sam Kinison came one night when Mitzi kicked him out of the Comedy Store and said he could perform. And Bud wasn't there, but Mark Linnell was there, who was Bud's partner. And Sam came in with his crew of people, and he said, hey, can I do a set? And back then there was a guy named Charlie Fleischer, who was the voice of Roger Rabbit. And Charlie was like the only comic that was sort of blessed to do both clubs. He could do the Comedy Store and he could do the Improv. And otherwise it was like the Hatfields and McCoys, man. If you were a Comedy Store comedian, if you were, Louis Anderson, you weren't going to perform at the Improv because you were a store guy. But for some reason, Charlie Fleischer, they let him do it. So Sam was a Comedy Store person. Right. And I think his thing was sort of like, you Mitzi, I'm just going to go to the Improv. Went over and I'm like, hey man, my pay rate's too low. I'm making $8-10 an hour, or whatever it is, even to do the showroom. And I was like, let me talk to Mark. And Mark's like, he's here now? I said, yeah. And he goes, do we have a full house? I'm like, yeah. He goes, hell yeah, get him up on the stage. And I do remember he came in, he went into the bathroom with a buddy of his. They came out quickly thereafter. He went up on stage Introduced Sam. Sam, during his set, did 2 double shots of Jack Daniels, killed, brought the house down, and then left. And I don't even know how much longer it was after that that he died. But it was just a matter of years. It wasn't a real long period of time. But so Sam was there, and the Improv was a weird joint because Evening at the Improv was huge at that time. So it was so everybody knew about the show. Right. And so it had sort of a touristy vibe because people wanted to see that, but it was also sort of when the comics were in town, if they weren't on the road, it was sort of a clubhouse for those guys, and they would just hang out front and just kibitz. And then at that point, it also became sort of a celebrity place. So, Roseanne Barr was dating Tom Arnold at the time, so they would come in, and all the paparazzi would be out front. Dennis Quaid would come in. There was a lot of folks that just kind of liked hanging out there because it was cool. It was just a cool vibe. And, I was like, it was like being the coat check dude at Birdland in the 50s. I'm there with all these people that are just the best of the best. Like there's just nobody better than these guys. And I just tried to keep my head down and shut up and just kind of, if they would talk to me, and some of them were really nice, some of them weren't, but I mean, so Adam Sandler was really nice. Jerry Seinfeld was really nice. Jay Leno said to me, if you'll get me some jokes, I'll take a look at them, and gave me a contract to write for him. I mean, there were some people that you never hear those stories. You only hear about the people that were total assholes, and they're like, this guy was such a, it's like, there were actually a lot of people that were nice to me that had no reason, no benefit from, like, there was no upside. They weren't getting anything from me, man. They were just being nice to be nice. And those stories need to be told too. People need to hear that.
I've heard Kevin Nealon say that he worked at the bar at the Improv in the 80s. Was he there when you were there?
No, he had already passed being a bartender, and he already gotten passed at the club, and he was doing sets though. I mean, he was still there, but I don't know. I'd have to look to see what years he was at Saturday Night Live, because he may have been on Saturday Night Live in '89. I don't know if somebody can check that out, but he may have already been gone. Like when Dennis Miller came in, he was only in if he was in town, because he was still based in New York.
Yeah, I listened to it. There's a podcast. It's called the Johnny Carson podcast. I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
It's this guy's name is Mark Melkoff, and he's like a historian, and he interviews people who basically comedians who did sets on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
Wow.
And so he talks a lot about so I heard Kevin Nealon was on there. He was saying that he was still a bartender the first time he did a set on Johnny Carson, and that so he did his set, then he went back to the bar and watched his set with all of his buddies.
Wow, that's a great story. That is back then it was truly. I mean, that was quite literally before my time. But the stories you hear was, there weren't 30 talk shows at night, and there weren't 900 stations. And if you got on Carson, like, your rate would double or triple overnight. Like right. that was sort of the final blessing. And if Johnny waved you over to the couch, then that's it. Louis Anderson got waved over. Ellen DeGeneres got waved over. I mean, that was, even if Johnny gave you that thumbs up that he gave, I mean, you were passed. Like you were in the family at that point. And it was a pretty big damn deal for those. So, I mean, the fact that he did it and then went back to bartending is hysterical. That's like a great improv. That's a great story, period. Just that, I can't imagine the rush that must have been for him. That would have been great.
Yeah, he told a great, he says that I guess, when the curtain parted and he comes out, he said he had a moment where he forgot his entire set. He's like, oh my God, the lights hit me, and he couldn't remember any of his jokes. And then he remembered the first joke, and then it was just like muscle memory after that. Because he had done those 5 minutes, 1,000 times, right?
10,000 times. Yeah.
So it was just muscle memory after the first phrase or whatever.
Yeah. I think they get. I think at that point, they were getting like 7.5 minutes.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
I mean, but which is mind blowing when you think, all right, come out from behind the curtain. You got 7.5 minutes for people to decide if they like you or not, and if they like you, they'll listen to your jokes, and if they like your jokes, they're going to laugh. I mean, everything is compressed pretty quick. I mean, it better be a tight 7,
Yeah.
There was a guy named Jimmy Breslin who was regular at the Improv, and he later on became Jay Leno's head writer for The Tonight Show. But he tells a really funny story when he was trying to get on The Tonight Show, and Fred DeCordova was the executive producer at the time.
Yeah.
And DeCordova had heard about his set. Well, Jimmy's set was, and for most comics, this is a huge crutch. This just, when you see a comic doing this, you're like, they got no game. But his set was just talking to the audience and just pulling funny shit out of the audience. And it was 30 minutes of where you from. And then, and he could run with it and would make it really great. And so he gets called into Fred DeCordova's office, and DeCordova goes, my staff tells me, they say at the Improv, there would be industry nights at the Improv every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And on those nights, either the networks would come in or a movie would come in, and you'd know because you'd look at the lineup, and instead of it being 7 people, it would be 21 comics, and they would all be getting like 8 minutes or 6 minutes or what, and you were like, oh shit, somebody's here, like HBO is scouting something, and it was just rocket for you. Just, hey, give it up for Adam Sandler, wasn't he great? All right, bring it to the stage, David Spade, give it up for David Spade, and I mean, the next person would come up, and he said, well, my staff tells me you're very funny, and I wanted you to come in and see it for myself. So go ahead and do your set. And Jimmy's in his office, and he's like right now, you want me to just do my set for you? And he's like, yeah, let me just hear it. And Jimmy's like, okay, so where are you from? DeCordova's like, what the fuck? What are you talking about here? And he's like, this is it. This is kind of what I do. And this is the whole thing. My wife's heard me tell this story 100 times, but I was bringing him up one time, and there was a woman out in just as you go up the middle aisle, you go up and there's like 3 steps and you're on stage, and there's only like a couple rows of 4 tops as you go up. So you couldn't miss the people right in front of you because they were 6 to 10 feet away from you. And this woman had on this sweatshirt that looked like this Jackson Pollock reject, sort of just like it was covered in paint and it was splattered and everything. And, my job was to warm up. So I go out and I talk to everybody, and I catch my eye, and I said, ma'am, was this a horrible painting accident? What happened here with the whole front? She said, no, a friend's an artist and blah, blah, blah. And we talked about it and got a laugh and moved on. And I introduced Jimmy. Well, Jimmy was out in Hell's Kitchen. I mean, and he would sit out there and he'd have like a button-down shirt on, and he'd have a knit tie rolled up in his pocket. And before he got on stage, he'd go, okay, well, I'm about to go on. So he put on this knit tie. So he looked kind of dorky. Like that was his sort of gig was, I know I look like an accountant, but, actually I'm very funny. So he was putting on his tie, didn't hear any of the exchange I did, and comes up on stage. And of course, his shtick is to talk to the audience. Did almost the exact same joke. It's like, man, what happened? Did you run into a paint truck? What happened? Well, they had just heard that. And so it was fine, but it didn't get a huge laugh. But he gets off stage, and I'm watching in horror and thinking, well, there goes my career, because Jimmy was one of the top guys at the club. And he gets off stage. I go, I got to tell you, man, right before you came up, you were in the bathroom putting on your tie. I sort of did almost that joke. And he looked at me, he goes, wasn't mad. He's like, yeah, I thought it was funnier than that. Didn't get any reaction at all. I was like, yeah, that's because they just heard it like 30 seconds before. So, yeah. But my experience there was really, really good. I'm hard pressed to even think of the comics that weren't nice to me. There were ones that never really engaged much, but the ones that were really nice, it's really a brotherhood, man. I mean, and a sisterhood. But I mean, at that time, Joy Behar, Elaine Boozler, those about the only 2 women I can think that were performing regular at the club when I was doing hosting there. Roseanne had already been huge. She already hit it huge. And I don't know about Ellen. I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know if she was a Comedy Store person or an improv person, but the people that were nice to me were really nice to me. They were really good.
That's great.
What about influences? Like when you try to learn a language and you're immersed in it, like it sounds like you really got immersed right in the comedy. Right. Who are some of the people that influenced you the most, and who are some of the, like, then as a comic and then now as a preacher?
Right. That's great. I think then as a comic, well, I'll tell you a funny story. I took a class with, I think a bird just ran into my window. There was horrible noise. So pray for that bird. I hope he's okay. I took a class at UCLA in comedy writing, and the class was taught by a guy named Bob Bassa. And Bob was one of the original Bozo the Clowns. And he was teaching setup, handle, payoff, like how do you write jokes? What structure? How do you do this? Why is ointment funnier than balm? Like what are the word choice? I mean, like we were all dorks. We were carrying around notebooks and all that shit. But I knew that if I took Bob's class, you could audition for a master's class that was taught by Bud Friedman. And I already applied for the improv twice, put in, to work the door or wash pans or whatever. And they just round filed it. They, everybody in the late 80s was a huge boom for comedy. So everybody wanted to do comedy. Everybody wanted to get, and that in the store were Mecca, so unless they needed you, they weren't interested. And so I took Bob's class, got done with Bob's class, and Bob led me to Bud's class. And I auditioned and got in. There was only like 10 of us. And I thought, you know what? If I can be in front of Bud Friedman for 10 weeks, maybe I got a shot at getting a gig at the end. And so I would go to the class every week. And every week I'd drive from there, I'd go to the Improv, and I'd just hang out. And one time Bud saw me and he was like, "Hey, Jerry." And I said, "Hi, Bud." And I remember seeing somebody, and I said, the doorman was having a hard time. I go, "When are you going to, get rid of this problem? I can solve this for you." I was a doorman and worked in bars and stuff a lot. And he said, "Hold on." He walked me over and he goes, "Melanie, this is Melanie. She's the manager tonight. This is Jerry. He's in my class. See if we have a position for him." And I started working at the Improv 3 nights a week that night. So, I mean, it was the only time in my life a plan ever went the way it was intended to go. I mean, like it was spectacular. But in Bud's class, we would do our set, we would record our set, and then we'd get critiqued from all the other comedians in the class. And then after their critique, Bud would critique it. Oh. And I remember I did my set and I got done, and Bud said to me, he goes, "I like your style." He goes, "You're very smooth. You look really comfortable on stage." Remember, I'd done 1,000+ shows, back in the Midwest. So I was like, "Yeah, I feel comfortable." He said, "Do you know you're doing Paul Reiser's routine?" And I was like, "I don't even know who Paul Reiser is." I didn't know. Their Comic Relief was just starting to break through then. I remember I thought this guy was really funny, but I didn't watch My Two Dads or whatever. Was that the one he was on? I think it was My Two Dads or Full House. I don't know. He's on one of them. Him and Saget and all those, and Dave Coulier. And I said, "I don't know." And he goes, "Well, you're not doing his jokes." He goes, "But side by side," he goes, "your pacing, your mannerism." He says that your hand gestures, the way you talk. He says the way you deliver stuff. He says, he goes, "You just need to know every casting director that sees you is going to say he's doing Paul Reiser." And then I saw Paul Reiser and I was like, "Holy shit, I'm doing Paul Reiser." So that was something that was just happenstance. He wasn't like a hero or anything of mine. When I was coming up, Seinfeld was probably the hero of comics. So everybody was trying to do that sort of, what's the deal with airline food? Can you believe it? New York and LA, isn't that crazy? They're so different, and you got to be really good. People have said about Seinfeld, they're like, the reason he was so fucking insanely good was he would take a topic and other comics would do 4 jokes on it and he would do 25 because he would squeeze every possible joke out of it. And that's why he could do stuff on the difference between New York and LA or airplane food. And it wasn't hacky and it wasn't stupid because he just pushed himself to like, other people are going to stop here. I'm going to go here and then I'm going to go here. And so, I mean, I think, everybody kind of wanted to be that. I knew early, it's ironic now because more than a few people know me as someone with colorful language. I never, professionally, I never was that guy because, I had the same sort of weatherman hair and I grew up in the Midwest and it just didn't work. I mean, when you watch people and you're just like, God, trying too hard. There was just that element of And as a result, there were a lot of comics that I knew that couldn't get jobs doing warm up for TV shows because they were too blue. They were just really pretty foul. And that's not a gig that, if you're going to do warm ups for a TV show, you have to have hours and hours and hours of clean stuff to entertain with. And so it worked out great because a lot of comics would say, hey, I don't know if you knew, but Dick Clark's show is looking for a warm up. You may want to go over there. I'm like, did you go? And they're like, Jesus, with my vocab? No, there's no way, but you could do it maybe. You might want to give it a try. And that was a good gig because you could make a shit ton of money. I mean, you worked harder than anybody in comedy because they brought in the studio audience and they were like, entertain them until we're done taping. And so a half hour, 22-minute show would take 3 hours to tape. So every time they're in back doing set changes or changing wardrobe, and the audience wasn't getting paid. So it's like they literally could get up and leave whenever they wanted to. So it's like you dance as fast as you can, what I mean? You're doing whatever you can, you're doing sing-alongs, you're doing anything to do. But that was sort of my wheelhouse, was that sort of Midwestern, aw shucks kind of guy. And it got me a lot of gigs. That part was great. So, but I mean, I would say Paul Reiser, to this day, when I see Reiser, and now I don't know if he does comedy, or now I think he just stays home and counts his money. I don't know what he does for a living, but I always thought his pacing, his stuff was great back in the day. Now I really think, I'm so dorky. In fact, Todd, I'll send you this clip because not only did I watch it, I then copy pasted it into my notes so that I could give it to other people. But it's Chappelle just killing it for 20 minutes. And what makes him so good, and I think pastors could, there was one time when I was at St. Andrew, and St. Andrew was a very affluent church, very affluent community. And we were spending a lot of money on a big church build at the time. And it was dicey, as that would be with a lot of churches, as not everybody's on board. And I said, I was preaching and I said, we like to think of ourselves as a congregation that welcomes everybody and that everybody can walk through the door. I said, but if you're a single mom, driving a Toyota and you pull in the parking lot and you see Saabs and Mercedes and BMWs and Cadillacs, I said, it's pretty easy to think I don't belong here. And man, it's a 1,000-seat church. I mean, you could hear a pin drop. And then I said, and that's just the staff parking. And it got this huge laugh. And at the end, people would come up to me and they were going, that was funny what you said, but it made me think. And I think that's the power of comedy, is that sometimes you can get away with shit if you can make people laugh that you wouldn't get away with straight up. Like if I had just let that sit there and linger, people would have been like, well, that's kind of a dick move. You know what I mean? Like it would have had a completely different vibe than if I made fun. And then I said, oh, and by the way, the Volvo was mine. And then when everybody laughed, I said, and by the way, it's 10 years old and it's got 120,000 miles on it. So the whole thing was about what perceptions do we lay on other people and how those can backfire on us and that whole thing. Chappelle, okay, that was one time in my life that I did. Chappelle will do that 7 times in a set. Yeah. And he will start telling a story and you'll forget, it sounds weird to say, but you'll forget that he's doing comedy. And he did a couple jokes in this 20-minute thing that I can't even repeat. They were so good, and he set it up so beautifully, I wouldn't do it justice. But he's telling the story, and the audience is silent, and he's just pulled in. And then he says the punchline, which you forget he's setting up a joke because the story was so long, and it just blows the roof off. And then he goes into another story and goes just long enough for you to forget that he's telling comedy and drops the punchline, and it crushes again. And you're like, that's what 30 years on stage looks like. I mean, that's what I'm like a fanboy, man. I geek out at what they do and how they do it. I mean, Louis C.K.'s fallen out of favor, but he was a great storyteller. He was
amazing.
He was amazing when he told those things. Chris Rock says some hard shit that people don't want to hear, man, but it's true. I mean, and it's about relationships, and it's about race relations, and it's about stuff that you're like, wow, that is so, the courage that they have to do that, the things that they do is pretty mind blowing. And I think most pastors are pretty, take the safe route. I'd put myself in that category too. I think we talk about safe things, and and granted, it's a different environment, and it's a different mise en scene. I mean, it's a different view of what we're. It's not a comedy club late at night, but still. Richard Rohr made a comment one time. He goes, how did he say it? He goes, I'm pretty certain if the gospel was ever preached in church, the pews would be empty. And I was like, wow, man, but Rohr says that shit all the time. I mean, Richard Rohr him and Peter Rollins, those guys are truth tellers. And again, in an interesting way, because they don't have churches. Yeah. They're just like, I'll go ahead. I'm going to drop this truth and then let the cards fall where they may. And they're both so damn bright, they can back it up. Theologically, they can back up their claims. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's interesting that you're talking about the relationship between pastoring and comedy. I was telling Todd the last time that we did this that I spent 2 weeks in Dayton, Ohio, with Pastor Mike Slaughter.
Sure.
Yeah, and I was actually interviewing at his church for a job that I didn't end up taking. I ended up moving to Albuquerque instead. But I was there 2 weeks, and I got to hang out with him. And one thing that he told me is that he studied comics. He told me, I study comedians. I study their delivery. I study the way that they set up premises. I study the way that they engage an audience, and the way that they can use humor to tell truth, and people will receive truth, hard truth, because I'm making them laugh. And then he said something that it's always stuck to me. He said, comedians are the only public speakers that can talk for an hour, and at the end of the hour, you're like, no, please keep going. He's like, pastors don't have that. Politicians don't have that. Professors don't have that. He's like, comedians have that. They can talk for an hour, and people still want them to keep going. They want to.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about professors, I guess, would fall to some degree similar under this category. But people have asked me a lot, after a couple decades of doing that, and now I'm pushing on 15 years doing this. And they said, how much are they alike and how much are they different? And one of the crucial pieces where they're different is, in comedy, you work on your 30 minutes, your 40 minutes for a lifetime. Yeah. And then when you get it just right, then you add new jokes. And like Leno always said, he goes, always put the new jokes in the middle. Keep a strong open, keep a strong close. You keep adding enough in the middle, pretty soon you got a whole new set, and you got this. But the audience always gets to see, unless at the Improv or the Comedy Store, because those truly are, they would literally, and I'm not making up the word, this is how they referred to it. They considered themselves art colonies. Right, and they were like, this is where comics go to work out their shit. And they would tell the audience, they go, look, if this shit's not funny, tough. You decided to come to the lab. This is a petri dish. And if you want to see him crush it, then you need to go to, Coconuts in Fort Lauderdale, where he'll be next week, and he will do 45 minutes and he'll kill. But right now he's working on the jokes so that next year when he goes to Coconuts, he'll be able to kill. And in preaching, in comedy, you hone that set and then you travel around the country and everybody goes, oh my God, they're amazing. That was great. In preaching, you stay in the same place and so does the audience. And now the material has to change because if you say the same stuff, they'll be like, yeah, we got that. Love each other. I know, but you still haven't gotten it. There's some things you want to hit, more than once. But for the most part, you got to do a different, quote unquote, set, a 15-minute set every week. And comics would look at you in horror. They'd be like, how in the hell do you do that? And I don't mean this insultingly at all, but I think we all know, there's few pastors that can compete with comics as far as public speakers go. And part of that is because, hey, screw you. I've had 7 days to work on this. You've had 7 years to work on your 15 minutes. So it's sort of apples and oranges in that way. The platform skills are the same. I used to be the instructor for licensed local pastor school for like 7 years. And the first assignment I would do for people would be go home and get on YouTube and watch comics and watch what they do and see how they control the audience and how they're not thrown by the silence. And, you know, the really good ones, there was a guy comedian named George Wallace, who was extraordinarily nice to me. For years, we exchanged Christmas cards, and he was already, you know, playing Vegas in the main room. You know, he was doing it, and he was always really lovely. And he would get up on stage on the off nights with a yellow legal pad, and he would get up there and he would say, he'd go, Jerry, hit me with the light, like when I got 7 minutes left. I said, okay. And he would say, folks, these are probably going to suck, but I'm just going to give these a try. And then at 7 minutes before I leave, I'll give you some real comedy. And so he would look at the sheet and he would just like, oh, okay, let me try this. And he'd put it down. He would do the joke. And like, sometimes they would land and sometimes they wouldn't land. And he would do it to the point where it was like, you're like, Jesus, George. I mean, but talk about fearless. I mean, just minutes of silence clumped on to the, and it was almost like a professor, like he's watching and going, okay, yeah, I got to fix that. I got to do that. And I'd hit him with the light at 7 minutes. Now keep in mind, he's not coming up on stage cold now. He's in the hole. Like everybody's going, it's the improv, man. I thought people were going to be better. And he would destroy the room in the last 7 minutes. And it would blow people's minds because they were like, how is this the same comic that I just watched for 30 minutes and we were getting ready to leave? And it's like, because you were watching a guy in his practice room playing his trumpet. You weren't watching the guy on stage, you know, at Birdland. It's a different thing. And I think Bill Maher is the one that has the joke where he goes, comedy is the only art form that you are not allowed to practice without people watching you. You know, he's got a great joke. He goes, nobody stood behind Picasso and went, more green, you idiot. You know, but in comedy, that's what you have to endure. And I was like, it's amazing to me. I mean, it really is.
But I love the purity of stand-up in this way. And maybe, you know, you can disagree with you obviously know more than I do, but I love what I perceive as the purity of it in the sense that, like, in acting or music, if you're good looking or if you have whatever, you can get away with not being that good at the craft, right? You can be like an okay singer, but if you have an image or a light show or whatever, if you're an actor too, if you're good looking or whatever, there's people that have never acted and then they win an Oscar on their first picture, right? In comedy, you cannot, unless you're funny, you're not going to make it. You can't make it on being good looking. As a matter of fact, being good looking might work against you because
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, I think there's definitely that set of when, you know, it's when.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a great, you may have seen this if you're a student of the game. There's a great conversation with Chris Rock, Louis C.K., Jerry Seinfeld, and Ricky Gervais.
Funny.
And you know do you remember the moment when Ricky Gervais says, he goes, well, you know, you guys all have something. You know, he says, you know, Louis, you got him kind of a slob, and Jerry, you got the I'm Jewish thing. You know, and Jerry goes, I don't really play that. He goes, but I do subtly, like as an undercurrent.
Yeah, but it's in there.
And he goes, and Chris, he goes, you're lucky. You got the whole black thing. And Chris Rock goes, thank goodness I'm black.
I love
that moment when comedy is one of those places where, you know what, if you're severely overweight, which our society deems as a negative, can be seen as a positive. You know, Louis Anderson proved that. If you're tall and geeky and you stutter and you're socially awkward in the real world where the world doesn't reward that, you can be Stephen Wright and you can kill it on stage being that same thing. So there is a weird leveling. Jerry Seinfeld's got a great line where he goes, the thing about comedy is, he says, in the end, it's the great leveler. Like, all the cream rises to the top. You do it long enough.
Yeah.
You get good enough. You rise to the top. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, fat, thin, gay, straight. You will make it to the top if you're funnier than other people.
Yeah.
Hard stop. And that's really true. I mean, I think, which is, I think, your point.
Yeah.
It's pure in the sense of, look, you're not going to win anybody over on stage at the Improv or at some late night club because your hair looks great, you know, or gorgeous, or wow, I love your sport coat. It's like,
Yeah.
look, deliver on the, and even Jay would, I remember Jay Leno making a comment one time. I said, God, because I would bring him up on stage, and it was the best Hollywood moment that I would have. I had to live it vicariously through somebody else, but it was still great because I'd say, you know, what have you guys done this week? Have you guys, have you been to the Tar Pits? You saw those and you went to, anyone go to the Walk of Fame? You go to the Walk of Fame. You been to Hollywood Bowl? Yeah, cool. That's awesome. Have you guys seen any celebrities yet? And they'd be like, no, not yet. And Leonard would always come in. He'd never be on the bill, but he's Jay Leno. You know, he'd come up. He'd be like, hey, Jerry, look, any chance, you know, I could, you know, I don't know, just do a set really quick. I'm like, who's going to say no to Jay Leno? You know, I mean, Jay Leno was the biggest star in the world, right? And I'd say, so I'd get up there and I'd say, you haven't seen any stars? And they'd say, no. I said, well, no matter what you've done on your vacation, that's not what you're going to talk about. What you're going to talk about is what's about to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, Jay Leno. And I mean, it would be like the Beatles walked in, and it was people were freaking out because it was a celebrity, for one, and two, Jay's really good at what he does, and he would always kill in the room, which is great. But one time we were talking, and he goes, you know what, that celebrity thing gets you about 5 minutes in. Yeah. He goes, that's right. He goes, each celebrity, it falls in that category of like good looking, handsome, well-dressed, all that stuff. It's like people will grace you for like 5 minutes, and then it's like, all right, comedy boy, let's bring the humor, you know. And he said that he used to go to Hermosa Comedy and Magic Club down in Hermosa Beach on Sunday nights, and I'd go down there and watch him. And just like George Wallace, he would have index cards, and he would just get up on stage, and he said the improv was too cool to really be able to gauge the jokes I was going to do on the Tonight Show. Like the jokes I was going to do on the Tonight Show were for what was commonly called the flyover states. You know, it wasn't New York and LA. It was, how's this going to play in Minnesota or in Michigan or Ohio? And he goes, and Hermosa Beach was as close to what we were going to get in that Midwest sensibility. And he would get on stage and he would read the jokes. He wasn't even delivering the jokes. He would read the jokes, and he would like look out the audience, and like you could just see the computer working and him like taking it all in and everything. And I would talk to him after, and I'm just like, God, you no offense, but shit, you didn't even sell it. You know what I mean? You just kind of, and he goes, you know, I know how to sell a joke. He goes, he knows that he can you believe what's going on here? Like, he can do all that shtick to punch it up. He goes, but that is only to enhance a good joke that's already been written. He says, you can't punch up shitty material. Yeah. Like it has to be good from the get-go. And I mean, he was such a purist with understanding the devotion to the words, to the phrase, to understand. And that's all comics. I mean, the amount of agony that goes in. George Carlin used to do a joke where he said, you know, I can make any joke funny if I can use the words Guam or suck. Either one of those two. If I can throw those in the joke, you know, I mean, and Carlin was the master of understanding the power of words. And he used to do this great joke where he was doing, remember when he did Hippy Dippy Weatherman, when he would do the newscaster stuff? And he said, you know, what was one joke? He goes, they were just headlines. He was just reading. He goes, when you break, he goes, you're putting your life into your foot's hands. And I was just like, just the turn of the 7 words you can't say on TV. Those words didn't exist. No. There was no 7 words. Like the FCC didn't make those, like he was riffing that bit. And then after he did that bit and it got famous, the FCC banned those words.
Oh,
but those were banned.
I didn't know that.
He did that bit. He just did because he realized how funny some of those curse words sound. I mean, they just lend themselves to that. But he could be funny without cursing at all. And that, I think, was I mean, I listened to Class Clown, AM, FM, like all his albums ad nauseum. Like I probably to this day, I can recite them by heart. I mean, that was the gateway drug for me for comedy. That was really it.
Yeah, even those 7 curse words, to me, it's not even about the curse words. It's the way that he put them in order and the cadence of how he sang them.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely. No.
That's funny. Yeah.
There's no question. And this doesn't even belong on the list. It's such a friendly sounding word.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that is.
Yeah.
Oh, and then he died. You're just like, okay, you know what? You are in. But I will tell you, there's a great George Carlin. I may get this wrong, but I think it's a George Carlin Louis C.K. story. And Louis C.K. said, I was doing clubs, he goes, and I was doing it for like 15, 20 years, and I sucked. And I was playing like Chinese restaurants, and like literally people in the restaurant were like who the fuck is that guy? Like they didn't even know there was going to be a comedian there. And I would just be doing set. He goes, and in between sets, I'd go out to my car and I'd listen to the radio and just think, God, everything is shit and I suck. And he goes, I was doing the same jokes the same way for years. He goes, and Carlin was getting interviewed. He goes, and they asked him about his HBO special. And they said, how are you? He was on like his fifth one or whatever it was. They said, how do you do that? And he goes, well, after every special, I just throw away the material.
Yeah.
And then I just start over. I mean, he does 45 minutes and then he starts with 5 minutes. Like he doesn't do any of the old stuff. He goes, and when I get another 45 that's really tight, I call HBO and they say, yeah, let's bring it on. And Louis C.K. said, it just blew my mind that he could do this. And I'm trying to think of what the quote was that he said. He goes, but you're offensive sometimes. And he goes, I would rather be offensive occasionally and hit gold than do the same stupid, shitty jokes all the time and just get by.
Yeah.
And Louis said he just bursted into tears hearing that. And he said, from that moment on, he said, fuck it, I'm writing new stuff. I'm just going to write new stuff. And he said, it was about a year and a half later, he got his first HBO special. So there is something there's comics that will just do the hack shit and comics know them within the first 4 minutes of them doing their set. And then there's people that they may suck as much, but you can see the shit they're trying is really weird or really avant-garde, or they're really leaning into the craft in a way that the other guy wasn't. And so suddenly you realize, I mean, there's comics that just rely on, there's a creative way to curse. And there's Pryor, I think it came out of the environment that he was in. He grew up in a whorehouse. I mean, his grandmother was he grew up in rough circumstances. That was his vernacular growing up. And that was just the way, and people would say Pryor had more shitty material than anybody. They go, he would get up there and just stay, but he was fearless. And he wouldn't throw him a bit to just be bombing and then hit gold. And he would do that. Chris Rock can be very funny. And he's got a cadence like a preacher. I mean, his grandfather was a preacher. And I mean, you can tell when he's doing that bit where he says, Barack Obama, Barack, I mean, you can hear the preacher cadence come out for sure. Yeah. But then there's other people that swear and you're listening to the joke and you're like, there's no punchline there.
Right.
Like, hey, motherfucker, that's not a punchline. That's just cursing. That's just trying to like win over the audience. And, some people have been successful at that, but most comics will look at that and go, eh. Cursing can either be a crutch or it can be very creative and well done. But, I think too often people think automatically, if in fact, there was a great article that was just somebody posted on Facebook the other day. The assumption was, and I grew up with the assumption, my mom said, I always thought that cursing was a crutch and that was meant you didn't have the vocabulary to use another word that was more appropriate. Well, now there's studies saying that cursing is seen as, in this one study, as a sign of intelligence and as a way of connecting to your crowd and connecting to your audience. And, that was probably true when I did After Hours. I mean, I think there was an element, they didn't want to hear a preacher's voice up there. They just wanted somebody to just talk to them. And at that point, I'd spent most of my life in bars, either doing stand-up or bartending. So I didn't have a real problem with connecting in that way. And, that doesn't work. At Aspen Community Church, didn't work at St. Andrew. And I get that. I mean, I think it didn't work when I did warm-ups. I think you got to respect the venue, wherever you are. But the people that do it really well. They can really do it great. So,
I think one thing that preaching and stand-up comedy have in common is being in the moment. Like you can tell when a good preacher is just there in the moment, and when somebody pulls out a sermon from a file, from 2 years ago or 7 years ago or 12 years, and they're just regurgitating the same stuff. And I think being in the moment for stand-up, that's what I love about stand-up comedy, is that even if they're telling the same joke and they've worked on it, there's still something's happening in that moment between the audience and the comedian. And something happens between the audience and the preacher, which is why preaching online and everything lately is so weird, because you don't have that. I did a drive-in service. I had a few drive-in services where there was cars, and like I knew people were there, but you couldn't get any reaction from them at all because you couldn't see anything. It was worse than just doing it to a camera, because with a camera there's nobody there. But you know there's people there, but then they seem bored or something. It freaked me out. And luckily I had a few chances to get better at it, but it's all very much of a skill set. And I think that there's something about being in that moment. Even if it's the same jokes, it's different because of the audience.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think for me, there's actually a great story that if you see early time during, let's see, am I still on camera for you guys?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because something just popped up in front of my screen. And like I said, my computer's being wonky. There's a great example of what you're talking about, Todd. In the early days when Letterman was going up against Jay Leno, when Jay Leno had taken over for Carson for the Tonight Show. And it's not to say that Letterman wasn't a stand-up, because he was, but for 30 years he had been a broadcaster, essentially. And you watch the styles of both of them, and Leno was performing to a live audience and the cameras were capturing it. Letterman was performing to cameras and the audience happened to be there.
Yes.
Now, to be fair, he had Gil, I'm thinking of it was Letterman's director for 30 years. I think his first name was Gil too. But I mean, Letterman knew that, when he was talking to so-and-so and he would switch he knew they were going to pick it up in the booth. And you watch all the goofy stuff that he does with his mannerisms and with his jacket. Like he was being funny as a broadcaster, and people happened to see it in the audience. Leno was playing to the audience and the cameras were picking it up. And it's sort of like having a camera, when PBS used to air Cats, it was like, this sucks. What's the big deal about Cats? It's like, you got to trust me. It's different in the theater. And I think that's true with right now with pastors in this pandemic. To be fair, everybody, I think it was Jay Baker, Jim Baker's son, that tweeted like right afterwards, like on March 18th or whatever, he just tweeted, he goes, and just like that, everybody became a televangelist.
Oh.
And it was like, one, it was super funny because of his dad, but two, there's truth to it. I mean, it's a different skill set to be able to deliver to the red dot or the green dot or whatever it is, not to mention all the other bullshit of where do we put the cameras and are they in the back of the sanctuary and do we zoom in? And some churches are killing it. I mean, they're just doing like really cool shit because they know how to do editing suite and they know how to like do all that stuff. For me, it's like, look, I'm going to look in the camera here. There's my fireplace. Be quiet for 2 minutes and we'll see you next week. I throw in an Our Father and they're gone. I've got a shoebox and my laptop. Like that's the technical expertise. And so you sort of try to lean into the material and try to make it, because I don't have bells and whistles. That just doesn't exist. But I think that comparison between Leno and Letterman is exactly what we'll see. You can see people that were great preachers. When I used to teach platform skills, and we used to tell the people in the room, you need to learn early if you're a big room speaker or a small room speaker. And there's people that we work for a company called BMC Software. And I'm like, look, if you're a small room person, you're going to be very relational. You're going to be able to look people in the eye. Those are pastors that kill it in small group studies because they can connect with people in a very tight way. And in theory, we all should be that. But let's face it, nobody's everything. And so these sales guys were killer in a small room, but you put them in a conference center at a conference and they would go up on their lines. They were kneeling coming out of the Tonight Show. They just would suddenly blank. And so there was definitely a skill set that's different. Now multiply that times, okay, now you get no audience whatsoever and you got to look into a camera. Shit, man. I mean, I've heard people say that we will lose 30% of our churches in a year. And I've heard people say that 30% of the people that were going to your church stopped watching. So, I mean, it's a tough time for churches right now. And I think pastors have been given a insurmountable task to just suddenly develop a new skill set. And by the way, you got to be really good at it. Like, be really good at it. I think that is so unfair to people that, one, let's face it. I mean, you and I know you get, I don't know, 8 cracks at it in seminary if you're lucky. And then, your preaching class, you can check that mark off and that's it. Now go out there and get them, Tiger. And I'm like, for me, that's a tragedy in the world of preaching, is that so many people aren't even given basic platform skills to learn to function from. And in comedy, it's funny, going back to Chappelle, when that kid asked him about doing it, and he said, I didn't think about it until tonight, and I thought I'd give it a shot. Chappelle goes, I think maybe the only rule is don't quit. He says, that's my only rule. He goes, let nothing stop you. And I mean, I'll be honest, 10 years and I was like, screw it, I ain't good at this. I'm good enough to make a living. I'm not good enough to make it to the bigs. I knew that and I stopped. He started at 14. So by the time he was 24, he had more experience than I did my entire career out in LA. So, I mean, that's mind-blowing. Now he's 44. Yeah, they make it look easy. But I mean, you talk to any of the good those guys. Jerry Seinfeld said to me one time we were talking, he said, I guess I was asking him a lot of questions. And he said, so are we just 2 guys talking, or are you asking me for advice? And I said, hey, we're 2 guys talking, and, one of us is asking the other one for advice. And he said, he goes, if you want my advice, he goes, get on stage every night, twice a night for 2 years, every night. And he goes, and I go, and then just back off and don't do it. He goes, well, then you keep doing it every night, but you could probably just do 1 set a night. I mean, what he's saying is he says, you should get on stage over 700 times a year for a couple of years. What do preachers do? We do 50 a year.
Yeah.
I mean, but that was the love, people look at these guys and I think there's this sense of what a life, you work 40 minutes, you do 1 show on Thursday and 2 sets on Friday and 2 on Saturday. That's your whole week. It's like, nobody sees all the notebooks and all the hours and nobody sees you suck. I mean, a lot of people saw me suck, but I mean, in general, nobody sees that. And, that just the tenacity of just not stopping and just going, I'm just going to do this until it's like, no, everybody thinks you suck. It's like, well, then I'll get back. I mean, and there are countless stories of comics that say, I sucked for years. Or I think Seinfeld tells a story where he killed it his first set. And then he went back and he thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And then, it was like a heroin. It was like chasing the dragon because he never did. The second set was like, eh. Third time he got up was like, eh. Fourth time. So now he's like, oh, screw it. Like he wasn't going to let go until he got that good again. So, you would have to have picked up by now, well, we'll just wind Jerry up and he'll just tell stories for an hour. I mean, I still have such a passion and respect for what those artists do and how they do it. And I think probably they don't get the respect they deserve simply because they make it look so easy. And I mean, it is, I wish I could remember which Chris Rock special it is, but it's the one where they don't even try to make it clean. They intercut between his set in Johannesburg, his set in New York, and was that Bring the Pain?
No.
I don't know if it might have been Bring the Pain. But what's amazing is it's very clear that he's doing 3 different events because his wardrobe is completely different in all 3 of them. but you watch him and they cut it in such a way that you watch him and it's almost perfect from one place to the next, which tells you how many hundreds of thousands of times he did that set, to where you couldn't even, if it wasn't for the clothes change, you wouldn't know. I mean, the rhythm, the cadence, the pacing, everything was identical. And it was amazing. And David Letterman will say, yeah, you can do that and have everything be identical, and one set can suck and the other set can kill. I mean, that's the beauty of live performance, is you don't know what's about to happen. I mean, you can like to think that I think it was Paul Reiser that said, there will come when I was talking to him, he goes, there will come a day when your worst set is better than your best set is today. And I think that's probably true. I think probably the crappiest I am now is still better than I was in 1989. You know, I mean, when I was really felt like it was going great. And that's just through thousands of hours of stuff, you know, I mean, of just doing it. So, does that give you a feel for comedy? I think I took a breath around 4:12, I think was the last.
No, man, it was great. We appreciate it. We love your stories, man. We love what you have to share. We'll do this again sometime, man.
I would love it. I think you really got something, that idea between divinity and comedy. I think there really is something that can be teased out there in the long. It opens
you up, right? Comedy opens you up in some kind of way.
It cracks people open and makes them open to hearing things they wouldn't normally hear. And I think it's Anne Lamott that says laughter is effervescent joy. I think I mean, to me, there's this sense of, I was talking to Nadia one time, we were having breakfast, and I said, I don't know where we figured out that the sacred has to be somber. In fact, she looked at me, she goes, that should be in one of your books. And sure enough, I put it in the book, because it's really true. I think the church has got, every denomination thinks they're the ones called the frozen chosen. And quite frankly, that's not a good title to claim. I mean, it's like, you don't want that. So who knows? If they would just listen to the three of us, we'd have all this figured out. But clearly, that's the case,
exactly. Well, thank you very much, Jerry. And thank you, everybody that listening to this and will listen to this. And do you have any final thoughts, Gil?
No, this was cool. This was great. Thank you so much for sharing all the stories.
Cool. Man, anytime you can talk to another fellow comedy geek, I'm always down with that, man. I love doing this. So anyway, thanks for asking me to be on. That was great.
Again, man. Thanks a lot.
I enjoyed it. Thanks, brother.
One.